Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Nina Yo, who is a Resilience Panel Coordinator at Refugee Radio. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Okay. So, as Rachel said, I'm Nina Yo, and I'm the group facilitator for the Refugee Radio Resilience Panel and support group, and I'll say a little bit about that later on. I'm really honoured to be invited to speak today, and so thank you very much to Lookman really for organising this and for inviting me to speak. Previously, I worked for Mind in Brighton and Hove, where I set up a peer support service, which is part of the primary care mental health service in Brighton. And before that, I worked for the British Red Cross, coordinating services for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and adult refugees in the community and in detention. And currently, I'm a postgraduate mental health nursing student at King's College in London. And I'm here today to talk about the link between chronic illness and mental health, and to look at that specifically within the refugee and migrant communities. Okay. Yeah? Is that louder? Okay. All right. So, as I said, I'm here to talk about the link between chronic illness and mental health, and look at that specifically within the refugee and migrant communities. And what I'll be looking at is the impact of situational factors, including physical health and forced migration, on mental health, and suggesting that a sense of our own personal agency and identity is crucial in maintaining well-being and withstanding adversity. So we're all probably aware that our physical and mental well-being is linked, and that they interact with one another. And this will be the case even amongst those of us who don't have a diagnosed physical or mental illness. We may feel run down and tired and develop minor health irritations, like things like mouth ulcers, in response to stress at home or at work, or as a result of major life changes. And equally, when suffering from common colds and flu, we may feel more tearful and depressed about things, and obstacles in our lives which we were coping with may suddenly seem insurmountable, and we may seek help and solace from others around us. I mean, these are really simple examples, but I think it's really important to make the link between these minor common experiences which we can all relate to, and the more serious long-term impact which viruses like hepatitis B or other chronic illnesses can have, not only on our physical but also on our mental health. And that's a fact, I think, which is often overlooked. There is a growing amount of evidence equally to show that people diagnosed with a serious mental illness, such as chronic depression, bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, have poorer physical health as well than the general population. Chang and fellow researchers at the Institute of Psychiatry found in 2011 that the life expectancy of those diagnosed with a serious mental illness may be reduced by up to 17.5 years, and I think recent studies have shown actually that that figure might be even higher than that, that the life expectancy might be reduced by even more than that figure. So returning to our first example then of someone diagnosed with a chronic illness, and remembering how we might all feel a bit miserable having spent a week in bed with a cold virus. Imagine how it might feel then were this illness to go on for much longer than expected and to get worse, and then to find out perhaps that it was not going to get better and may in fact be with you for life. I think it'd be hard for anyone not to feel depressed by this, at least in the short term. And we talked as well about how we might reach out to family members and others around us for support when we felt unwell. Imagine that as a refugee or a migrant, you are separated from family members who you may have no means of contacting, or who might be in less fortunate circumstances than yourself, so you may not want to burden them with your problems. And imagine as well that on coming to the UK, you'd been dispersed as part of the asylum dispersal system, so that you were relocated and housed far away from friends you'd made and any local connections you and had no control over where you were living or your living circumstances. I think most of us would feel pretty terrible in that situation. You might then pick up a newspaper and see yourself branded as a scrounger or a health tourist because you're accessing health treatment in the UK, although you did not come here to access that treatment and you may be unable to return home. I don't think that would make any of us feel any better. The stigma and scapegoating which many refugees and asylum seekers and migrants face, which may in fact share some common ground with the stigma linked with those suffering from infectious diseases like hepatitis B, is often based on false assumptions, misunderstandings and omissions of facts, and can also have a huge impact on mental health. But let's look first at the link between chronic illness and mental health in general. Within the general population, chronic illnesses are linked to higher rates of depression. The public health specialist Claire Mitchison's article on depression, which was published in Brighton and Hove Director of Public Health 2013 report called Happiness, found that being unable to work due to disability or ill health to be the highest risk factor for depression, with 85% of respondents in this group seen as higher risk of depression in a health count survey in the city in 2012. Being able to work is often a key part of our identity and gives us a sense of agency in our lives, providing us with an income and ability to provide for ourselves and our families, which chronic illness can threaten or take away. This may heighten the sense of powerlessness already felt in the face of health conditions which are out of our control. And if we are unable to work, that's a key sign that our health condition might be disabling and impacting on other elements of our life as well. What we're talking about here is perhaps not only the link between physical and mental health, but between mental health and our situation, which might include our physical health, but also our environment, our relationships with others, resources, and freedom from ill treatment. Rates of mental illness amongst those from lower income groups living in deprived areas are significantly higher. The Department of Health Psychiatric Needs Index rates needs in the most deprived local authorities as 4 times greater than those in the wealthiest areas. Insecure attachments and experiences of domestic violence and abuse have also been found to accompany more traditionally accepted biological and genetic risk factors in many studies. So how is this all relevant when looking specifically at the refugee and migrant community? The combined situational impact on refugees, asylum seekers and migrants may be great, as we have already touched on briefly with the example I gave earlier. Interestingly, other risk factors for depression which Claire Mitchison names in her depression report include bereavement and isolation, which are of particular significance to refugees separated from family, who often feel a great sense of loss not only because of the death of loved ones, but also through a sense of mourning for culture, identity and nationality, as well as social, political and economic status. Mental distress might be termed as a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, which, if continuing, may lead to a diagnosis of mental illness. As we discussed earlier, feeling depressed for a short period may be a natural consequence of being diagnosed with a chronic illness. Some people may then regain a positive outlook on life as they come to terms with their diagnosis. Others, however, may go on to be diagnosed with clinical depression if the symptoms experienced are more severe and last for a longer period of time. Our ability to cope with negative life events is referred to as our resilience and may be dependent on many of the factors we've already discussed. For example, our environmental and economic circumstances, close relationships with others and family history. It is not hard to see then why a refugee or migrant diagnosed with a chronic illness may be even more likely to go on to develop a mental health condition, typically facing both negative experiences in the past and a lack of supportive structures in the present. A study of physical and mental health in 178 refugees and 232 asylum seekers in reception centres in the Netherlands found that 59% of asylum seekers and 42% of refugees considered their health to be poor in general. Comorbidity was also high, with over half of respondents diagnosed with more than one chronic condition. Interestingly, rates of post-traumatic stress, anxiety and depression were higher amongst asylum seekers and refugees, showing a correlation between mental health, mental well-being and state and legal status. The 2013 Happiness Report found that having a positive outlook in life, despite physical health problems, was linked to more favourable outcomes in terms of health. And this has also been found to be the case within recovery literature focusing on mental illness. Hopes for the future are of course important to everyone's well-being, so it is unsurprising that uncertainty about legal status and potential consequences, which many with asylum and human rights claims endure years of, may have a negative impact on physical and mental health. As I mentioned, I currently facilitate the Resilience Panel at Refugee Radio. The Resilience Panel was set up in 2012 to support asylum seekers, refugees and migrants in Brighton and Hove and across Sussex who were suffering from post-traumatic stress symptoms and depression as a result of their experiences. It also seeks to raise awareness of mental health issues amongst refugees and migrants who may be reluctant to ask for help or may not be aware of services available. In similar terms to the link between depressive symptoms and more enduring ones which we discussed earlier, mild post-traumatic stress symptoms might be experienced by anyone involved in a traumatic event. It is only those people who go on to develop enduring and severe symptoms, perhaps continue for many years afterwards, who may be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Multiple traumas, poor resilience and other situational factors may increase the likelihood of prolonged suffering. Many refugees and asylum seekers suffer from post-traumatic stress symptoms but lack the awareness of it as a recognised condition and the vocabulary to express it, thereby preventing them from accessing relevant treatment and specialist services. And it was for this reason that Refugee Radio sought to develop the Resilience Panel. One of the issues discussed at the weekly 2013 Resilience Panel support group meetings was the right to work for asylum seekers. We have already discussed how not being able to work due to ill health or disability is a risk factor for mental health. So it is important to consider here that asylum seekers and migrants are commonly not granted the right to work. Some migrants are commonly not granted the right to work, which forces them to rely on limited government payments, which for an asylum seeker is currently £36.72 a week. It also inhibits their sense of identity and agency, which is likely to already have been diminished by leaving their home countries and cultures, and possibly by adverse experiences. Campaigns like the Still Human, Still Here campaign, which brought charities and NGOs together to argue for rights for failed asylum seekers living in destitution in the UK, have called for asylum seekers to be given the right to work while they are waiting for their cases to be determined. The Resilience Panel support group chose to focus on giving asylum seekers the right to work, alongside greater support to have existing qualifications converted and validated in the UK, as potential changes to campaign for, because of the shared experience within the group that being able to work helps to re-establish a positive sense of identity and can combat post-traumatic stress symptoms and depression which asylum seekers often experience. It was agreed by members of the Resilience Panel that being forced into a passive position in which they were dependent on government payments and had very little choice over living circumstances had a detrimental effect on their mental health, and that the trauma they were recovering from included being detained and being assessed as part of the asylum system. We addressed earlier the link between chronic illness and poor mental health, which may be attributed to a sense of powerlessness and fears about the future, and may be exacerbated by a lack of supportive factors. We might argue that the mental health of a migrant or asylum seeker with uncertain legal status in the UK may be affected by similar factors, in addition to more immediate threats to physical and mental well-being, such as the absence of basic needs like accommodation and food. To separate legal rights and entitlements from one's health becomes therefore very problematic. Another issue of concern to the Resilience Panel, which I quote here, is the rights and treatment of migrants who were accommodated under Section 21 of the National Assistance Act of 1948. This compels the state to intervene in the life of a migrant when it is deemed that the human rights needs of that migrant are in jeopardy, and has to protect the dignity of the migrant, especially if a no recourse to public funds clause is present on his or her visa, or the person is of high risk of mental illness. However, it does not recognise the multi-dimensional causal factors of mental illness which we've already discussed, or acknowledge that destitution and lack of access to health services will impact on mental well-being. Is it any wonder that a person who is stateless and detained indefinitely, or is homeless and destitute, will experience poor physical and mental health? The Resilience Panel was set up as a vehicle through which refugees and migrants could have a voice and be involved in positive action within the community. While it cannot provide immediate solutions to all the issues discussed here, it perhaps represents the hope which refugees and migrants, having come so far, may have for the future. In addition to other factors discussed, resilience is dependent on the existence of learned coping strategies from previous adverse experiences, which many refugees and migrants possess in abundance. The recognition of and belief in our own strength may be crucial in overcoming health challenges, but the legislative hoops which refugees and migrants have to jump through in order to seek protection under asylum or human rights law undermines this concept, as claimants' passivity and proved inability to cope with challenges is key to success in terms of those processes, and may therefore in itself have long-lasting consequences on health and well-being. The Resilience Panel calls for reforms in the way asylum and migrant claims are dealt with in the UK, which does not penalise claimants for positive actions or evidence of strengths, and can therefore promote principles of resilience and recovery. It also calls for an acknowledgement of the psychological impact of statelessness or no recourse to public funds, which arguably is a challenge to human rights of those people affected. Thank you.